Hey guys, Jay here. In this lesson, we're going to start setting up our jump mechanic. And I might even speed through this lesson quite simply because it doesn't do anything new that we haven't done before. So you guys can easily follow along if you actually implemented the movement as well as the rolling mechanic. But feel free to watch this as many times as you want. With this, we also get another mechanic free of charge. So for the jump mechanic, just to give you a little overview of what we're going to do, we simply need a jump start animation, which just does that boost up jump, right? And then while you're in midair, you're gonna have a falling idle, right? And then as soon as you land, when you hit the ground, we're gonna have a landing animation as well. So three types of animations, but say you're jumping from high up ledge, right? And you're landing down below, right? So while falling, you're gonna have a falling idle animation as well, free of charge, simply out of this code, because we're gonna address situations where the play is not grounded. And if you're not grounded, you're going to go into falling idle animation. So that being said, let's jump into it. I'm going to get started by getting my animations first. So we simply need a jump up animation. It's called jump up. So it should be this one. There you go. So in this, you simply don't need the whole cycle of jumping and doing that arc and then landing. We are basically going to break it into three states simply because we want control over it. We don't want the jump to control the jump height and things like that. We want to control it ourselves. So to do that, we're going to modularize the animations, right? So instead of getting the whole cycle, just to reiterate, we are going to break it into three parts. So the first part is the jumping up, right? So this looks good to me. Don't worry about the weird loop here. It's going to look good when actually implemented. So let's download this. I don't want the skin, and I'm going to select FBX for Unity. That's it. Hit download. All right, that's the first animation. The second one we need is a fall idle, right? So we're going to search for fall idle. There you go. So this one's pretty good. So simply, this will be used when you're in midair, right? So whenever you're not grounded and you're in midair, you haven't still hit the ground, this animation is going to play, and it's going to be very useful when you're jumping off high places or when you're in the mid of the jump, right? So the other thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to reduce the arm size here, character arm space. When you do that, see how the arm sort of came down, which kind of looks good, but it's completely up to you. There's no preference here. That's personal preference. So download here without skin, Unity, load. All right, the next thing is I'm going to get a old land, I think it's called, if I remember right. Let me see the name of this. Jump land. What's it called? Jump land. Let me just quickly look at my previous project because I had it set up here. Let's pull up the name of this. I believe it's called landing. Oh, okay, simple enough. It's called landing, and I simply need a, what was that animation? Let me just get the same thing so that it looks good. I think it's this one. All right, so it's again, okay, it's not this one, it's this one, right? So we don't want a lot of Y movement up there. So this one clearly has pretty, the height is pretty low. So we simply need control over it. So we want the mid-air to sort of transition into this animation. This looks pretty good to me. This is fine. So we're not going to do any changes. We're simply going to download settings. All right. That being said, let's jump into this. I'm going to bring in these three animations into my animations folder. Animations, player. And then if I go to my downloads folder, I should have three animations. I'm going to drag all three in here. I'm just going to rename them. So this is jumping up. So this is the jump animation, right? So I'm just going to go to the animation tab over here. It's already jumping up. That's fine. I'm not going to change it. And then falling to landing, falling idle. Okay, I'm happy with the names. It's already there. Cool. That being said, let's click on the player. Let's go to the animator. And then we simply need to set up this these three states, right? So we already have a blend tree. Just to refresh your memory, we've got the roll up there, but we're going to have a jump state at the bottom here. So what we're going to do is first, I'm going to drag in the jumping up, right? Cool. And I'm going to drag in the falling idle, and I'm going to drag in the landing. All right. So it's up to you how you organize this, by the way. It's just personal preference, but just make sure that those arrows are sort of not intersecting with each other. I mean, you can, but it's just that when you have a lot of states, it's going to be very confusing to see which state is going from one state to another. Like, where is the arrow pointing? It's super confusing when you have a massive, timeline of animation. So just make sure that you sort of space them out and make it clear. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some states between these. So obviously you can only go to a jump state while you're in the blend tree, right? So just to refresh the memory, blend tree has two animations, idle and movement, right? So whenever you're in any of those, that's when you can transition into jumping. So I'm going to right click blend tree, make transition, jump. All right. So what happens after you jump? You should immediately go into the falling idle, right? You're in midair. So I'm going to right click, jump up, make transition, falling idle. So immediately after that, you're going to go into falling landing, but there's a condition there, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to right click falling idle, fall into landing, and then landing back to blend tree. All right. So this is basically the cycle that any player would go through while doing the jump, but there are some conditions here, right? So we're going to set up the conditions now. I'm just going to open up my previous project just to speed things up. So I can immediately look at what I did earlier. All right. So the first thing is we are going to go to parameters, and I'm going to create a trigger called start jump. So let's set that up. Oh, all right. So what this does is, as soon as player presses space, in my game it's space, when you press space, we're going to tell the animator to go into the start jump trigger, right? So which means player is now immediately jumping, go into the animation state of that. So I'm going to click on this transition, go to plus here, and then select start jump. Now, I'm going to remove has exit time because if you remember, has exit time basically defines whether you want to wait until the current animation completes before going on to the next one, which means if you're in the middle of walking, do you want to complete the walking before you jump? No, we want to immediately jump because that's when the player wants to jump, right? If we add a delay there, it could make or break the game, right? Because it could break the game. Because say you're trying to jump between platforms and you're trying to transition to that, if there's a delay between the jump, that's going to ruin the game, right? So we don't want to wait, immediately go into jump state. That's all good. So the next thing is I also need to immediately transition into falling state. No changes here. So has exit time, meaning just go through the entire jump animation and then transition to the next one. That's all good. So the next one is we're going to have a variable called is grounded, which is a bool, right? So click on the plus here, bool is grounded. All right, so what we're going to do is click the plus in the falling to landing transition. Click on is grounded as true. All right, turn off has exit time as well, meaning as soon as the player hits the ground, we're going to tell the animator, we just hit the ground, so is grounded equals true, right? So the animator is going to know that, meaning you're no longer in midair. You're going to transition from midair to falling to landing animation. That's why we said you only transition between these two states if is grounded is true. I hope that makes sense. If not, please rewatch that part again. It'll definitely make sense. And don't worry about these parameters. Just add them here. We're going to go into the script next, and we're going to tell the animator, just like how we did with the roll animation and the blend tree. We're going to tell the animator, play just press jump, start jump, play just grounded, it's grounded. All right. So once that's done, it's going to immediately go into the blend tree. No conditions there. As soon as you land, landing completes, go into blend tree. That's simply it. Now let's go to the script and let's code this into life. All right, guys, now that we have the animator set up, we're going to go to the scene and we're going to do one thing to our player. So our player is over here. Right? So we're going to create, you know that whole raycasting that I mentioned, the invisible line, we're going to start setting that up. But the invisible line will be going from one object in a certain direction until it hits another type of object, right? That's the basic theory of it. So if you're sending out a raycast from the player downward, it's going to always start from the origin point of the game object, right? So if you select the player, you can see, in my case at least, now I don't know if you guys have the same problem with your 3D model, but with my 3D model, the origin point is over here at the bottom, which is not good. Ideally, it should be over here. This is the reason that we created the center point when we did the whole movements and things like that, right? So, however, we're not going to use the center point either because that's at the center, right? So we don't want the raycast to go from the chest area downward. We want to ideally take it from the feet level down, because it's like a tiny line that basically goes from the feet to check if the player is grounded, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to right click the player and create a new empty object. So we're going to call this ground checkpoint. So we're going to move that a little above the base of the feet to around the start of the feet, right? So it should be around this point, guys. It should be roughly around this point, but it's completely up to you. It can be around here, here, as long as it's above the ground and sort of like the midsection of the shoe or the beginning of the shoe, start of the shoe, that's fine. So somewhere around this point is completely fine. So this is the point that we're going to send out the raycast from to check if it collided with a ground. Right. So one thing we're gonna you guys are gonna hear when I get into the script side of things is the word layer. All right. So now what's layer in Unity? Right. So layer basically allows us to create a differentiation between different game objects. Right. We can have one type of category called layer ground, and we can add multiple game objects to that same layer. Right. To rephrase it, you can have the base ground level, which is where we are right now, or you can have a platform that's up there. You can have a mountain. You can have basically a building or anything like that that player can stand on. We can basically categorize them as ground, right? But we can also have different bodies such as water or fire, lava, anything like that. We can categorize them separately in a different layer called water, lava, or fire, whatever it is, right? So where do we actually define this? If you click on any of the game objects, I'll just go ahead and click player. On the top right in the inspector, there is a section called layer. So by default, the default layer will be selected for all game objects that you create or add into the scene by Unity, right? But if you click that, you should already have a couple of layers that Unity has created for you, water, UI, and things like that. You can go ahead and add a new layer called ground if you want to. We're gonna do that. So click on add layer and just add a new layer called ground and hit enter. You're good. Now this just simply creates it, doesn't assign it. So go back to the ground here, right? And then go to layer. And then you should see your new layer that you just created. So it doesn't matter which game object you selected when you clicked on add layer. It doesn't really assign it. You gotta always go back and click the game object and then assign it to obviously assign this new layer. So for the ground here, which is what I've selected, the flow, click on ground, which means that this layer is assigned to this game object, and this game object is sort of now categorized when compared to the others. So if you click on the others, for example, these mountainous walls and things like that, they're in the default layer, whereas the ground is now in the ground layer. All right. This allows us to allow the player to jump on certain platforms and not jump on certain other platforms, right? Which is good because we don't want the player to wall jump, right? We don't want the player to collide on the wall and be able to jump out. That's not good. Unless that's the sort of game you're going for, something like a Prince of Persia kind of game where you can wall jump in Assassin's Creed and that kind of game, right? In this game, however, you got to be on the ground to jump up and do things like roll and things like that. All right, that being said, we are all good now. Let's go to the script and let me show you the changes that I've already applied because I want to save time. And feel free to copy this code or use the code down below this video to add it into your project. So what are the changes I added? I added a couple of variables at the top here. All right, so the first thing I added was the player height. That's the height of the player. And then I have a ground checkpoint, which is the game object, the one that we just created, the new empty game object. And then we have a ground check distance. Now, what is that? That's basically how far ahead this raycast is going to cast to check for a ground, right? So it's going to start from the base, that feet level, and it's going to send out an invisible ray to see if it hits ground. That's the distance. And then we have a layer mask. What is ground? I named it what is ground because it's the simplest way to do that. It makes sense. The name makes sense. It basically checks for a certain layer. What is the layer? Ground. We just created that. So layer mask allows us to sort of create a condition between these layers and say, we are looking for this particular type of layer, not this particular. And you'll see what I mean when we go to the UI side of the game in just a minute. I'm just going to introduce everything that we did here so it makes sense. And then we have a jump force. That's how far it's going to jump, the force, and then the jump cooldown. Now, what's jump cooldown? That's basically the delay between consecutive jumps. We're not going to allow the player to just jump like this, right? That's going to be weird, right? Instead, we're going to allow the player to jump, the tiny cooldown, and then allow the player to jump again. Beyond that, I also have these two variables. I'm actually going to move them to the top here so that they're in the same section as the jump, right? So you have a grounded option, which basically checks if the player is grounded, right? The ground layer. And then we have another variable called ready to jump, which is true by default. This is what allows the player to jump again after completing one jump, right? It'll make sense in just a bit. Now in the update, I've made 3 changes as well. I have a ground check condition here. So this is how we check for ground if the player is grounded. The first thing is we're going to check the distance to the ground. How do we do that? On the left-hand side of the equation, it's float distance to ground equals player's height, which is my height, multiplied by how far ahead this raycast is going to go. That's the ground check distance. That's the distance to the ground, right? The second thing is we perform the raycast. Now, how do we do the raycast? We simply say grounded equals, right? That's the Boolean, physics.raycast. Now, this is how you cast a raycast in Unity using a couple of variables. So what are these variables here? Let's have a look. They're separated by commas, right? So which means there are 4 variables here, 4 parameters passed in, right? The first thing is, if you hover over raycast, it's going to give you a little introduction to what we're actually doing here. The first variable here is the origin, where we are sending this raycast from, which is ground checkpoint or transcendent position, which refers to the position of the ground checkpoint, the empty game object we created. Comma, the second parameter is the direction. What's the direction? Vector3 dot down, right? What's the third parameter? Let me just hover over this. Float max distance. That's how far ahead this raycast is going to go, which is distance to ground, which is up there, right? And then the fourth thing is the layer mask. What is ground? So what this does is we're going to tell raycast that if you collide with this type of game object in this particular layer, we consider that the raycast just hit something, right? If not, you go through that, right? Real world example is if this raycast, this invisible line hits a game object of type water, it's going to ignore. It's just going to keep going forward until it hits the next thing, right? Whereas if it hits a game object of type ground, we just hit ground, right? So that's basically the condition that detects if this raycast actually hits something. So that's what is ground there, okay? The next thing is, you guys already know this, animator.setBool is grounded equals grounded, right? We basically pass in a variable that says true or false to is grounded variable, which is basically what we created in the animator just a minute ago, right? Other than that, I created a new method here called jump. Then if you scroll over here to the jump method here, it's very straightforward. You guys already know what this means. The first thing is input.getKey space. We just check if the player pressed space, and ready to jump equals true, which means that the player has to be ready to jump so that we don't allow them to consecutively jump repeatedly, continuously without any delay. And then we say grounded equals false. Now, why doesn't this have equals true? It can. It is the same thing as saying grounded equals true, right? But a little hack in C# is that if you don't say anything, if you don't say grounded equals true, it assumes the Boolean is true. And you can only do that in an if condition. That's why I added both these types here, both formats, just for you to make sense that they're both pretty much doing the same thing, which is checking if something is true. And then as soon as you go inside of this if condition, we say ready to jump equals false. We immediately turn off the ability to jump again until it completes one cycle, right? The next thing is we do the trigger, start the animation trigger, which is start jump. That is the same variable that we added over here just to make sense of what we just did there. Start jump, right? And then we say, we basically reset the velocities. Now, let's say the player already has some sort of velocity. It's in the middle of a walk or, jogging, and then, or middle of a roll, and then you immediately go for a jump. We kind of want to reset the velocity because otherwise it kind of creates this kind of glitchy moment in the game. So by resetting the Y velocity, because we're going to apply a force there, we kind of make it smooth, right? So you can experiment by not having this line of code, guys, and see what happens. But this line of code basically resets the Y velocity over here. We make it 0. Then basically we set that as the velocity, all right? You guys already know the velocity thing in Rigid Body. We covered that in the movement chapter. And then basically the next thing is, you already know this one as well. We did it in the roll chapter, which is the previous chapter. We apply a force in a certain direction, which is up, jumping, multiplied by the jump force, which is declared up here, all right? And then comma, what is force mode.impulse? Force mode.impulse basically adds some sort of effect to this add force script. Basically what it does is this impulse effect, which is basically what you would see in a jump, which is just applying the force upward. There's a little impulse there. So it's a nice effect to have. You can not have that and just have force more dot force, right? Which is what we did in the roll. But by having that, it just looks good, right? Next thing is we're going to reset this jump. Now, what is this line, this invoke thing? Guys, this is one of the most useful things that you'll learn in this chapter, right? The whole jump thing aside, this is one of the new things that you'll learn. By using invoke, and then we have a new method over here called reset jump, and then we have this variable called jump cooldown. What we're actually doing is we're adding a delay before calling the next function, which is such a useful function. Now, as opposed to this, don't do this. I'm just going to show you a little example. The normal way of calling a method looks like this, right? You already know this. We've done that many times. Reset jump, we just simply call it. But this is going to immediately, instantly call a reset jump, which is not ideal, which means it's immediately going to go ready to jump equals false. We reset the jump. We allow the player to jump again. But we want to add that delay there, right? The delay is what makes that jump realistic. We jump and then wait for a couple of seconds, and then not a couple of seconds, a couple of milliseconds, and we jump again. But how do we add a delay before calling a method? By using the invoke, then invoke method, and then we simply say the name of method, reset jump. Name of is just a way of sort of telling C# this is the name of the function that we're looking for, comma. Jump cooldown is a float variable that we declared up there, which basically is the number of seconds before jumping again. And then basically what it does is it waits for that time period and then jumps again. So we're going to say like 0.25 or like 250 milliseconds, in other words, as the jump cooldown period. So we wait for 250 milliseconds and we allow them to jump again, right? This together is basically the script, guys. Let's save that. Let's go over to the Unity engine and basically set this up. So if you click on player, scroll to the bottom, you should have these new variables up here, right? Player height is, I'm going to set that to 1. I've already done that, right? Player height is 1. Ground checkpoint, we don't have that, so let's drag that. What is that? So it's in player. All right, so it's in player. So in the player, there is a game object called ground checkpoint. We're going to drag and drop that over here. And then what's the ground check distance? I've set it as 0.5. That's basically like a tiny line. So we add that there. So what is ground? Right now it says everything. That's not ideal because we created a layer called ground, right? So we're going to go over here to this drop down and we're going to select nothing first. So it deselects everything. And then we're going to only select ground. There we go. So that way you can only jump or detect that the player is grounded only on game objects that has a layer ground, right? Which is what we did earlier. Then we set the jump force to 8. That is a good value to have. And then jump cooldown as 0.25, which is translated to 250 milliseconds. That being said, make sure that ready to jump is also checked as true, grounded as false, because it's anyway going to turn on automatically when the player is on the ground. Feel free to run this. So when we run this, as you can see, the grounded just turned on as well because it detects that I'm grounded. And if I press space and jump, awesome. As you can see, there's a little issue there at the end with the transition kind of like delays there before actually falling. We're going to fix that. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm also going to reduce the jump force to 5 because 8 is just too far ahead up there. Bring it down a bit. Let's go to animator and let's fix that delay there, right? So what's this delay? If you click on this arrow that's going from the blend tree to jumping up, right? That's basically the transition time into the next animation. If you go to the settings here at the top right, you should be able to see that it has a transition offset of 0.25 in mind, right? It works really well with these numbers, but we can improve that. So if you set that 0.1 as this transition duration, what it means is that the transition from going from player movement to jumping is faster. So it's going to quickly transition, which is ideally what we want, right? And then what we're going to do next for falling as well is 0.1 transition. Same thing, 0.1 as a transition time. And falling idle should be 0.1 as well. And then we're going to set this transition offset to 4. Now what this means is that there's a little offset between the transition. meaning it's going to skip a couple of milliseconds in the animation, because as you can see in that animation, there's a little height difference between these two animations. So go with these values and it gives you the best results with these animations, the maximal animations. So let's try this out. As you can see, that definitely works better. Now, what's this weird issue here, right? Now I'm facing it. I don't know if you guys are. So let's try and fix that as well. This is good, but obviously there's this weird delay there between each jump. And then also after jumping, there's this weird delay as well to go back to movement. So if I go to animator, I can have a better look at what's happening. All right. So I'm in the movement, I'm moving, and then I jump. Immediately I'm in jump up, but I'm kind of stuck here for a second before I actually transition to the blend tree. Now that's because we don't have a condition, guys. We're kind of waiting for the animation to complete, right? This is the reason that we don't like has exit time in certain instances. So what we're going to do is turn this off in falling landing to blend tree. We're going to add a condition called is grounded equals true, right? So now let's try it out. We're going to immediately go into movement now, which is exactly what we want. Now that looks pretty good to me. I would say that's pretty good. It's decent. And now I should be able to jump on platforms as long as I can jump this high enough. All right, now that didn't work. Now tell me why that didn't work, guys. That's because the player thinks that it's still in air. That's because it didn't land on this new platform. What's the reason for that? This new platform is now marked as ground. So we got to go ahead and do that, right? So I'm also going to make it a bit shorter so I can actually jump on it. And I'm going to change this layer to ground. Now I should be able to stand on it. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to that platform. All right. Then I should be able to, boom. It's kind of glitchy, but that's because this platform is kind of weirdly shaped. And also the colliders are kind of weird as well. So let's see if we can fix these issues right away, right? But I should be able to now stand on that, see? But it's kind of too high, too tall and things like that. So we're going to fix that right away. So let's click on the player. I'm just going to increase my jump force to 7 or 6 point. Actually, 7 is good. Feel free to experiment, guys. I'm just tweaking these numbers to make it work really well, but it's completely up to you how you want to tweak these values. So this seems a bit too tall still. I'm also going to, reduce this height here. And one other thing is it has a weird shape, guys. So this is a problem with this prototype pack that I got. Ideally, it should have sort of an even edge. Right now, it has this, if you guys can see, it has this weird shape to this. That's kind of why it's acting that way. But what you can do is, if you want to, is turn off this mesh collider and add a different type of collider. Now, what is this edge called? That's a collider we've already revisited. We visited that before when we created the capsule colliders for the player in the player movement section. But there are other types of colliders you can use. A mesh collider basically tries to take the shape of the mesh. Mesh is basically this 3D object. So it has these weird edges at the, this weird shape at the edges. That's why it's trying to mimic that using the mesh collider. But instead of this, we can simply add a box collider to this, which will make things easier. So as you can see, now it tries to look like an actual box here. So it doesn't really care about those weird edges. It just tries to become a normal box. Let's try this. It should work much better. I'm going to go over there now, and I'm going to try and jump on this. Way better, way better. There you go. This looks way better, guys. By the way, that was my Discord notification. Don't be confused if you're using Discord, wondering where the notification is. I'm not going to edit that out. All right, there you go. Nice. This looks way better. Actually, now I feel like the player is jumping way too high. So I'm going to click on the play again and then bring this down to maybe 6. 6 would work really well. Now I want to show you guys one more thing before I finish this lesson. You should be able to jump on this platform now. So let's go over there and do the jump. Awesome. Yep, that looks pretty good. We have the roll that's already working. So I should be able to jump on this platform. Basically, I'm going to change that up a little bit before the next lesson. Just even out that platform a little bit. Ideally, for this lesson, let's just have cubes. It doesn't have this weird shape. So I'm going to replace that in the next lesson. But let's just fall out from this game into this edge, right? Now, we want to be able to, it's still in player movement animation, right? We want to fix that. Ideally, we want the player to always go into falling idle when it falls from a high edge. Now, how do you do that? It's quite simple. Go to animator in the player, see this and see this. We don't have a line there. We need to have a line. So whenever the player falls from a ledge without actually having to jump, it should immediately go into falling idle. And then as soon as the player hits the ground, the normal cycle should take place. You go through this, right? So we're going to right-click player blend tree, make transition into falling idle, and we're going to click on this line and say turn off has exit time. Click on plus here and say is grounded is false. Does that make sense? So when the player is not grounded at any given time, when it's moving, it's going to immediately go into falling idle, which is going to look really good when you fall from tall ledges and things like that. So I'm going to make this gameplay a little bit bigger, and let's jump off from this ledge, right? So, right, let's jump off from here. See, that looks pretty good. Now I can immediately transition into falling movement whenever it's falling from any high place. So you can also change this transition time like we did earlier to 0.1. It's going to be more reactive. That's it, guys. That's it for this lesson. It's been a long lesson. Sorry about that, but feel free to watch this again and again. I try to keep this as short as I can, but some of these lessons just drag on for a little bit because I do take the time to explain it as much as possible, and I want you guys to really understand the theory. So feel free to watch these at 2x speed if you want to, if you can catch up. But I feel like 1.25 speed would work really well in the speed section of this player. If not, just rewatch this many times as you guys want. See you guys in the next video. We'll be setting up the combat